All right, week 7. And in the RL, right, you're all in week 5. Except for Daniel at this point is in week 6, which is awesome. Again, I try to encourage as much as your schedules allow to work ahead. And honestly, that's because A, it just is good discipline. We all need better discipline. I know I work on that, which is why I'm trying to be at least 2 weeks ahead. I need to actually be more because I got to start. I've already got, for those of you interested in taking CIT85, which is HTML and CSS, I've got that course mostly set up. I got to get some more content rolled out, which is why I'm trying to keep ahead because, again, it's discipline, right? Now, why do I bring up Daniel? Is I just finished a few minutes ago recording the video for the discussion this week, and I went back and he had just posted for week 6 about first validation, form validation, which is great comment because he's absolutely right about that. And oftentimes, we're trying to be as real world in these classes as we can. But using some of that built-in HTML to validate allowed me to do was kind of focus on some other things. I'd always intended on coming back, so his comment was spot on. And the other thing he brought up was modules, and what's great is he mentioned it. I had already recorded it, so you're going to get that this week. Okay, but let me just click into week 7 and just talk about, right, this is the validation. Daniel's comment, really good, solid, and you may not see this video until you're already through that, but I'll go in and comment to him as well. So the thing I want you to understand, and I in week 6 where I gave the video from last semester where I went over it, I talked about CRUD apps, and I didn't really talk about them with you all. But the idea of a CRUD app is it does all 4 CRUD operations. It creates, and by creates we get user input. That's how we create, right? Then we read that, in this case, the input back. So that's the R. So C, create, R, read. We're reading the objects in the array. Okay, and the last 2 is the edit, give the user the ability to edit the data, and then D, to be able to delete the data. So that's something that as we move into week 8, I'm going to try to do both, because at this point we have the C and the R. After this week, you will have the C and the R done for the user input. We need to do C, R, U, update, edit, and delete. So those are the 2 functions. So we call them CRUD, actually shouldn't say functions, CRUD operations that we need to make sure we do in our code. And the reason is when you write your app for your decision-making process, right, then that's the 4 operations you'll need to do over the course of those weeks where I was showing you. Okay? And those start in week 9, so we're in week 7, right? So as we approach that, just thinking about it, right? So right now we're writing code that handles the input of the user for household and number of members and the size of the house to calculate the so far the carbon footprint. So you can take those same concepts and think about what kind of inputs would you need to make a daily decision that you make in your life. Okay, so that's the kind of thinking as we're going through this you want to do, right? To where you get the user input, right? What inputs go into you making that decision? Once you gather those to doing the form, right, then you store that and you read it back or you render it back to the page. And again, the update and delete we're going to be working on. So at least at this point, you'll at least have hopefully a pretty good idea because we've done forms. So now this week we take and do more of the rendering. Okay. Now let me just actually show you, right? Here is where I ended up with the code from my output from the discussion. And I talk about in the discussion, once you get there, that you don't have to have all the output yet, because it takes a little bit to wrap our heads around that, right? So, but I just want to show you. So this is the creating, right? Right. So if I create the, right, so once I hit submit, I'm creating the output, and I'm also reading the output back. So that's C and R here. We haven't wired up the edit and delete, but that's where that code would logically be. So at this point, the state of the app, again, I talk about, and just keep this in mind, I talk about in the discussion, just having the name and the footprint for now would be fine. But attempt more of it, but we'll start week 8 with talking about that process. But that's all done in a module. You'll learn about modules this week. Here's the other term I want you to get from this week, though. This data that we have created and read back is not persistent. Okay, and persistent means that when you refresh the page, right, it's not persistent, it's volatile. It's in RAM, it's not in the hard drive. When we refresh, that data goes away. Okay, so that's important to, and it's something that I think once we get after week 9 and we get through, you know, doing some validation as per the great input from Daniel, which is right, spot on for what I had intended to do. So I love that. But also once we get the edit wired up, then it would be the perfect time to do what's called using local storage to store this, okay, data. In the real world application, you would be storing these out on a server somewhere. Okay. So, but in our case, we're only dealing with client-side JavaScript. So client-side, the browser side of JavaScript, not any server side. That would be your PHP, your Node.js, Perl. I mean, we could go on and on about the different ways if you were writing server-side Python, if you were writing server-side code to handle that form submission, that would first, it would also validate that input. Once you have valid input, then it would store it most likely in some kind of database. But there's ways we can simulate that idea with local storage. But more than anything, what I want you to understand is the way we're doing the C and the R for CRUD operations, we're doing it at this point with using data that is volatile, not persistent. And what we want to do over time is make it persistent, because that's more real world. Anyway, this should be, I hope, an interesting week. So if I go back and look over here, right, at our items, what you'll have for Monday on week 7 is we'll do actually hard code first, tabular data like this. When I was doing this output is what we refer to as tabular data, right? It's creating a table. Very common thing to do, and it really starts to hopefully get you used to the idea of that you're creating the DOM, the output of this, dynamically versus hard coding it. Okay, so you'll get that experience this week, and then we're going to code the heading in this one, and then we'll code the body, and then at the end of that we'll actually get the exposure to the modules, because you know, it's so funny that Daniel made the comment that the code was getting so long, he felt like it's time to do modules, and I had just got it ready. So it's like, I love it when a plan comes together that you had a plan, but it's confirmed by other people. Anyway, so what's our reply this week, right? We're at week 7, right? At this point, you know, hopefully you have an idea about what's to come. We have week 8 and week 9 is when you'll have that just writing the logic for your decision, which is again the preview I gave you on week 6. And then of course the window for code reviews will start here, right? It opens October 16th, ends December 7th. And then that's a pretty crazy week on week 11. For us, I'll probably end up having to drop, maybe, we'll see. I got to work that out. Anyway, There you go. So the reply could be like, do you understand CRUD operations? Does that make sense? Because it's a very common term we hear in programming, especially on the web, especially on JavaScript client side JavaScript, right? That'd be the thing. Do you understand the term client side JavaScript? At this point, you've already been through validation, right? You've been through forms. We're writing HTML to validate, right? To make sure we're getting good data. But we're going to end up writing code to do that validation because the way we've done it is a good first draft, but not ultimately the way you want to do it. So any of that, right? Or any other questions that might come up. All right, have a great week. I'll talk to you later.